Well, hey there. We are so grateful that you've tuned in with us today. If you just watched the message that Pastor Tom delivered, wasn't it a great message? Some wonderful truths in there that we all really need to think about and take to heart. And at the end of the message, there was a slide, and Pastor Tom posed a few questions to us and a challenge as well. And today we are a panel here, and we just want to talk about some of those questions. And I'm Rachel. I'm part of the leadership team at Lake Point, and I'm going to let the panel here introduce themselves as well.
I'm David, and I help out with the men's ministry here at Lake Point. And it's a wonderful group of guys who get together and we have a great time.
I am Carol. I periodically sing on worship team, and I am the proud mama of Amy, who is our children's ministry leader.
My name's Max, and I fill in on the greeting team, the safety team, and the usher team when needed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here today.
Sure.
We all just sat and listened to Pastor Tom's message. And Carol, I want to ask you this first question. It says, how often do you listen to perspectives different than your own?
I am guilty and ashamed to say that not often enough. I think in this world we tend to hang out with people who think like us and act like us and look like us. And so I don't as often as I should, but it's something I'm trying to educate myself on. And I am purposely reaching out to individuals who I know have different perspectives. I want to engage in those conversations. I'm watching videos and reading books that give me a different perspective on racism in the world outside of my own little sheltered area. I'm trying, and I want to hear what people have to say, and I want to hear why they believe what they believe. Because that, to me, is more important than what you say you believe, but back it up with the whys.
Right. That's great. And we have the door for opportunity for that is just wide open.
Blown
right
wide
now.
open, yes.
You don't have to look for a reason anymore. It's just there. So good for you. That's a good challenge for me as well. So, hey, David, this question is, how can you make a point to regularly pray for justice, compassion, restoration, and unity that only God can help us meet?
Restoration, justice, compassion, and unity. Well, quite honestly, I pray very hard for what's going on in America today. And I do pray for justice. I do pray for equality. And I try to learn from a biblical example. Taking John chapter 4, for instance, where Jesus is at the well, and a Samaritan woman comes up to him, and he asks her for a drink, and she's absolutely shocked that he is asking her for this drink. And I think her shock is because, A, she's a Samaritan woman who is despised by the Jews. And the last thing that a male Jew would do in the middle of the day would be talk to a Samaritan woman. And then there's the perception of this woman being at the well during the noon hour, trying to avoid everybody else because women gathered water either in the morning or in the evening. But yet here she is in the middle of the day. So there's an assumption that, she's there because she doesn't want to see any people because of her past. She's been married 5 times. The man she's living with now isn't her husband. So, she carries that weight. Yet, here's Jesus asking this woman for a drink. And honestly, he opens up the conversation with her, not because he's thirsty, but because she's thirsty. And he wants to help her to be restored, feel a sense of restoration, even though she's been married 5 times, and the guy she's living with now isn't her husband. He wants her to feel a sense of restoration. He wants her to feel a sense of there is justice here and compassion, and I want to offer this to you. And that's, I believe, why he strikes this conversation up, because he certainly doesn't need a drink of water. He's trying to offer her that living water. Well, when I read things like that, that's what touches my heart. And when I go to pray, I try to pray in that manner, the same way that Jesus would try to restore someone of a different ethnicity, different race, different gender, different social status, yet he is willing to offer this person his restoration, his living water. And that's how I try to model my prayer time.
That's great. That's great. So Max, I'm going to ask, what are some ways that you can push back against racism by loving boldly, recklessly, generously, and unconditionally this next week?
Well, I think that for me, with everything that's going on, in society, and we hear all this negative stuff on a regular basis. We hear all this stuff that's going on, and I think one thing Pastor Tom said in the message that really struck to me is we don't have to pick a side.
Yeah.
And feeding on what Carol said, we hear all this stuff that's going on. We hear all these different perspectives, but are we listening? Am I listening? So I think to push back against racism, sit down and listen. Hearing and listening we all know are two totally different things.
Right.
When you're listening, you're trying to understand, you're trying to get another perspective. And for me, I believe that, when we're listening, we're all different. We're all different in many different ways. Let's focus on the similarities, not the differences. When you're listening to, when I'm listening to other people and trying to, really hear what they have to say, instead of focusing and paying all this attention on the, what we don't have in common, let's focus on the similarities.
Right.
Once we've
Find that common
found
denominator.
some common denominator, the
Exactly.
similarities, then we can grow with love, we can grow with compassion, we can build on that.
Right.
And, honestly, I stopped watching the news and all that stuff because all it is the negativity and the differences. We're all human beings. It doesn't matter really what your background is. It doesn't really matter your ethnicity, your political beliefs. Really, honestly, this might sound horrible, but I don't really care about any of that. We're all human beings. We got stuff in common. Let's focus on that and build on that and grow with that.
Yeah.
And if we all did that, I think that would push back against a lot of that stuff. And, I appreciate Carol's honesty about that she's not the greatest at that. Hey, I'm not the greatest at this. A lot of times I hear and don't listen. So the prayer for me this week is to listen, not just to hear what people are saying. I want to, sit down and really listen to them. And like I said, not to repeat myself, but, what do we got in common? Not what we don't have in common. Because if we focus on what we don't have in common, we got nothing to build on, right? I want to focus on what we do have in common, where we can go from there and get to know each other because we all have stuff in common. We're all human beings, right?
Right.
Yeah.
As Tom mentioned that, that we are all created in the image of God.
Amen.
It's not just what God looks like you and God looks like you, and heaven forbid that he looks like me, but we are all created in his image. So there's a great founding point right there. It's a great starting point for establishing relationship. We have unity, at least at that level. And then we can grow from there. That's,
When you were talking, it just reminded me of the prayer of St. Francis, where it says, Master, grant that I may never seek as much to be consoled as to console, and as much to understand, that to be understood. You do not, sorry, I'm
To be
fumbling.
understood as to
Understand, yes, you need to be, and don't ask to be understood yourself, but asking that you can help understand other people. So when you're talking about really hearing what people are saying and really listening to it, we should be asking in our prayer life to seek to understand the hurts people have. The hurts out there are real, whether whether we've seen it happen or not, whether we've actively acted upon it or not. Their hurts are real, and we need to understand that. And that's where I really want to get to, is where I can see somebody else's pain and understand it, so I can help mentor or help.
and you mentioned St. Francis, and that just brings to another point. We have to do more than just talk about it. We actually have to do it. We have to participate in this. And he said something also that
Yes, I know this
I
one.
try to live by. Go out and preach the gospel to all the world. And if necessary, use words.
Yeah.
So we have to live, rather than speak it, we have to live it. And that's the most important factor, I think.
right, yeah.
Another thing I like about what you said is, we got to validate the pain, whether it's, may not be our pain, but it's their pain. We got to validate that.
Right.
Because, we don't know their experience.
Exactly right.
And really, it's, I think a lot of these people that are out there, with the protests and stuff, they just want to be heard.
Yes.
They have a right to be heard. Let's listen. let's not just hear him, let's listen to him, you know? And that's a prayer for me.
If you haven't watched the message yet, please go back and do that. It'll be posted on Facebook, on YouTube. You can listen to it anytime. You know, if you'd like to be part of these discussions, we'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at rachelt@lakepoint.net. You can call the church. We'll have all the contact information up here. But if you'd like to be on a discussion panel with us, let us know. We'd love to have you here with us. So, Max, Carol, David, thank you so much for being
welcome.
here
Thank
today.
you.
Thank you, Rachel.
You all have a
Amen.
wonderful week. You have a wonderful week, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.